Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and I got my friend Michael Ladano back to the channel finally. How are you, Mike?
I'm great. How about yourself?
Not too bad, not too bad. We have
Excellent.
got a new show concept for Daydream Nation, and it's called Out of My Comfort Zone. We do an appraisal of an album in a genre of rock that we may not be familiar with. Straight off the bat, prog rock is not an area that I'm all fay with. It's an area that I'm exploring more and more. And the band that we're going to talk today is Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Brain Salad Surgery from 1973. So I only just started listening to this like over the last couple of months. Mike has been assigned the same task, and we are going to do a appraisal of the album with relatively fresh ears, out of my comfort zone. So, Mike, what was your dealings with Emerson, Lake and Palmer, if any, over your rock listening career?
I think the first time I heard Keith Emerson on anything, it was Rock Aid Armenia in 1990 with Ian Gillan. And he did the keyboards on Smoke on the Water. And it was really weird kind of keyboards for my ears. It was that beep, burp, burp, kind of like the synth orchestra kind of keys. And it wasn't to my taste, to be frank with you. The other two guys, Zilch, I literally am coming to this with the freshest of ears. I have no experience with Emerson, Lake and Palmer outside of one brief period in my retail career at the record store when I was working with a guy by the name of Wise Man Mark. And Wise Man Mark was the kind of employee who liked to show up when it was convenient to him. And he liked to take a lot of mind expanding kind of chemicals and listen to music such as, I think, Tarkus was the one. Is that the one with the armadillo on the cover, the
Yes,
armadillo tank?
that is the
He was
one. Yes.
raving about this armadillo tank album. And I listened to Tarkus once with him, and that is it. That's my ELP history.
There you go. Well, I've had some brief history with them. I did a show a couple of years ago with Bicyclelegs on Emerson, Lake and Powell. So that was like reverse engineering to get into ELP. And I've heard some other albums here and there. Fanfare for the Common Man is one that gets played in sports shows. I think that's their most famous track. But in respect of this album, completely zero. I'll do a little bit of admin. So this came out in 1973. The producer was Greg Lake. So Emerson, Lake and Palmer comprise Keith Emerson on keyboards, Greg Lake on vocals, bass and acoustic guitar, and the great Carl Palmer on drums. Now, on this particular album, Peter Sinfield, ex of King Crimson, provided the lyrics. This was a bit of a hit in its day in 1973, hit the UK number 2 position in the album charts, US number 11, 1 platinum, and Australia number 17. So there we have a very stark album cover by H.R. Geiger. And I've got the Japanese version, and you open it
Oh,
up. And you've got the lyric sheet, I assume, in Japanese.
wow.
Yeah.
That's
And on the
beautiful, Peter.
back of it, brain salad surgery. So I tell
Peter,
you
is
what,
that the way the original vinyl came with a fold-out cover like that, or is that specific to that edition?
I'm not sure. So I think our commenters can tell us. But so just a little bit of background. H.R. Geiger, I watched a documentary that was actually his girlfriend. So he
Huh?
did a photo of that. But he, he did a lot of work that was very biomechanical,
Yeah.
machinery, meeting human flesh. Basically, we know about Alien. I don't need to get into it. I think everyone knows the works. It's a very stark, outstanding album cover, and it sort of invites you to listen to it. So we'll do the tracks. The first track on the album is Jerusalem. So, what did you think of this track?
Well, Peter, I should preface this by explaining my listening history over the last 2 to 3 weeks with this album. I'd say I'd listened to it maybe 20 times in different settings. And the first listen was here at home, and it was baffling to me. I didn't know what I was hearing. So my first impression was cacophony. It was, what the heck am I listening to here? What are all these synth trumpets coming out of the speakers? I knew the lyrics. I was familiar with the poem, I guess, that it's based on, but the music I'd never heard before in my life. Second listen through, Jerusalem was the first track that was getting into my head. It has melody to it. It's probably the most immediately accessible track given my experience here. So I would say Jerusalem was the first one that opened itself to me. But I find it cold sounding in the production. I find it distant, corny. I'm sorry, folks. Like Peter said, we're outside of our comfort zone here. And I thought, I like prog, sure, man. Like, I've got a Rush t-shirt in my closet, and I have some Dream Theater CDs behind me. This is leagues above and beyond Rush and Dream Theater. Um, I do hear things like that Styx and Queen probably pulled out of ELP at points of their career, but I found this to be completely new, a little bit uninviting, but yet intriguing enough that I would have taken a second listen, even if I wasn't doing research for a show. You know what I mean? I knew
Yeah.
there was something there that was within my wheelhouse. I mean, I love great musicianship, don't I? So, yeah, I would say a good opening. Maybe a little baffling because this is such a strange and diverse album, and that is the only track that sounds like that on this album.
Mm.
But onwards we go.
Yeah, yeah. So I see this album and it's like the album cover. It's like you're opening it and you're going into something, and this is the first song that you hear, and it's like an overture. It's a hymn, it's very regal. And well, I mean, the lyrics are William Blake, who was a very famous romantic English poet. The music is Herbert Parry. And, the thing that you hear is you've got the organ work of Keith Emerson and the phonetic drumming of Carl Palmer. And it's really funny to hear. This is like a very special hymn in Britain, Great Britain. And when this album came out, it got banned on the BBC because they thought it was sacrilegious. It's held in that sort of aura. It's held in a very high regard. I love Greg Lake's very melodic vocals, but yeah, it's an intriguing song. You definitely want to hear more. So to me, it is the overture to this album. It's track one, and let's hear track two. So Takata, which is an instrumental. What do you think of this song?
Well, I read that it's based on a classical piece, which I'd never heard, but wow, this is the one that almost completely derailed me when I was listening for the first time. There's one bit in the middle of the song with, gosh, I don't know what we're listening to, but it sounded to me like a game of Pac-Man. Boop, boop, woo, woo, woo. This is a crazy track. It is crazy. The drumming on this is like above and beyond anything I've heard before.
How good is his drumming? It's phonetic.
Yes, it's I mean, it's obviously intricately composed, but it's how do I put this? It's like an exercise in proving how smart he is. It's um it's almost like, okay, let's throw in everything into one track. Let's do everything in one track. And yeah, it was almost overwhelming. I like listening to this track as just sort of I don't know, an exercise in expanding my mind and trying to understand what's going on, but I can't necessarily say that I am listening to it for pleasure. It's a tough,
Too dense for you? Do you think it's too
yeah,
many
dense.
layers to it? It's just one of those ones you
fast.
have to listen to a few times to unpeel it.
I feel like I have to pay a lot more attention to what's going on. I can't just necessarily listen to it in the background
Mm.
like I do with some other kinds of music. I can play other bands and listen to them in the background and get a good feel for the songs. But this was like, I'm, and another thing is that it comes at you differently depending on where you're listening to it. I listened to it here in the car, at the office, at the cottage, inside the cottage and outside the cottage, like five different
Mm.
locations. And it was hitting me kind of differently each time. Um, my wife was like, "What is this?" She was listening to it with me, and
Do you find it surprising that this music was way up in the charts in the early 70s? This was
oh yeah,
prog rock was king for I mean the years 72, 73. Yes, and ELP, amongst others, ruled the rock with with your Deep Purples and Led Zeppelins and Black Sabbaths. Do you find it, listening to this, which is a very, I mean, this is all keyboard and drums. There's not a lot of guitar. Do you find that surprising that this sort of music in, looking from 2024, because we're new to this, was such a hit?
oh yeah. I didn't know what I was getting when I bought this because I mean, I bought it
Mm,
without hearing it, and based on the cover, it evokes one kind of image. And based on reputation, I was expecting something a little bit more commercial,
yeah,
something that was a little bit more easy to get into on, second or third listen.
yeah.
I spent some time talking to our friend Bicyclelegs, and he talked about how this album jumped out at him at age 14. I think it was like a first listen experience with him at age 14, which I told him quite frankly, on first listen, I was baffled by what I was hearing, and I'm kind of surprised that he found it so easy to get into on first listen.
Mm.
But at that age, your mind is more malleable, and perhaps mine's more closed. I don't know.
There's a lot of counterpoint with the keyboards, like there's with Keith Emerson. I think if he was in the era of Bach, he would have thrived because a lot of his keyboard work is counterpoint, where the top hand's doing something to the bottom hand, and there are all these different melodies. Do you like that sort of the Baroque period, like Bach?
Well, I do, but I mean, this is kind of more my stuff. I'm into the more bombastic kind of
Classical,
classical music.
classical, yes. Not
But
as much Baroque. Yeah, I'm just trying to pick your brains to see where your headset is. Because yeah, look, I completely get it because it would be daunting because you're a rock fan like myself and
mhm.
hearing this and just being a little puzzled and it's like a mystery and just trying to unpeel it. And, maybe the penny has dropped. We'll find out at the end of the show, or maybe it hasn't, or we need further listens. But my view of Takata was that keyboard is king. So Emerson, he is the most valuable player. He is the leader, even though he's not the vocalist. And you've got Carl Palmer, who's following the rhythm patterns of Keith Emerson on the keyboards. And then it sort of follows from there, with Greg Lake and the wonderful bass. So you've got these wonderful keyboard stabs, and the keyboard with the keyboard stabs is almost like a second percussion instrument. Like piano is percussion, so he's just using it as a percussion instrument. When I heard this, I thought I've heard this before. It's in music as a soundtrack, and I thought I reckon this sounds like the soundtrack to the original Tron. The Disney movie in a computer game. So I went back to my soundtrack with Tron and I played it and blow me down with a feather. It sounds so much alike. Now, Tron had music by Wendy Carlos. Now, Wendy Carlos was famous for Switched on Bach, which was Baroque electronic music. And it was like Moog. That was very much in the early 70s. But you listen to some sequences and pieces of Tron, especially some of the sequences where the evil minions or whatever are following the actual players. It sounds exactly the same. So it's kind of influential. Yeah. And also what was used in this particular song was Carl Palmer's drum kit was triggering programmed sounds. So I think in 1972, that was quite interesting and a little bit groundbreaking. So there's a bit of groundbreaking stuff. I mean, in 2024 years, we might think it's kind of might be a little bit dated, but this is the genesis for a lot of electronic music and a lot of technology that came out of this particular album. Anyway, are you familiar with the Tron movie and the Tron soundtrack?
I have the Tron soundtrack. I bought it this year, actually. I just bought it this year on vinyl, and I'm familiar with Wendy Carlos from mostly the Shining soundtrack, which Jen and I actually watched last night. We watched The Shining together.
Oh, what a
Uh,
soundtrack. That
yeah,
soundtrack's like another personality to that film.
yeah.
Whole
But
new show we could do on that. Yeah.
in regards to similarities to ELP, I know what you're talking about, and I have to admit to you that the Tron soundtrack didn't jump out at me on the first or second listen. It was a difficult first or second listen for me too. So they share that with ELP. Um, but I agree with you about the innovation aspect with these. I mean, this is all being done analog back
Mm.
then in the early 70s, and I mentioned these things sounded like Pac-Man sound effects at one point. So, wrap your mind around they're doing that before Pac-Man existed. They're doing that with instruments and circuit boards, and that's incredible to me.
All right. Well, the next song is Still You Turn Me On. What do you think of this song?
This is the one I like a lot. This is the one at the cottage when we played this album a couple of times. This is the one that had the parts that jumped out at us the most. That wow, 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 wow. Ticka, 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 ticka. And I guess there's a little bit of guitar there, which is used sparingly on this album. But that really beefy bass part, that wow, 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 that was awesome. I like this song. Um, it would be the one that I would come back to
Do you want to
for
be an
sure.
angel? Do you want to be a star? It's nice lyrics. I like his voice. It's very calming, serene. It's a nice performance. And you've got that wonderful acoustic guitar line that weaves under the vocal. I watched ELP at the California Jam on YouTube, and it was really interesting that Greg Lake's singing and he's chewing gum. So he's playing the bass and he's chewing gum and singing. And so's Keith Emerson. I've never seen that before. And
Keeping their mouths moist is the key.
yeah, I just found that unusual. I've never seen that. But yeah, this is a definite highlight on the album. It's a really nice song. And I think it's wrapped around the vocal. It's a really nice vocal performance. Now, this is one of the more controversial songs where a lot of folk either love or hate. Benny the Bouncer.
So you just throw it to me like that, eh? In other words, you want me to, do I love it? Do I hate it? I don't know. It's harsh. When it comes on after Still You Turn Me On, it's a left turn. It's a sharp turn. I feel like I'm in the 1920s or the 1930s in a saloon. Um, Normally I like that kind of left turn. I would like it if it was on a Queen album, but this is like the velocity here and the piano, the dexterity, um, the drum work. It's crazy. This song, and of course the change of voice. Greg Lake singing in a completely different voice now. Um, I like it. I would think I would love it if it was on an Alice Cooper album or a Queen album. It's one of those left turns that those artists do. But this was just I don't know, too much caffeine. Those guys were drinking too much coffee or something. It's just like take your feet off the gas pedal a little bit. And again, sonically, I'm hearing it harsh in my ears.
It's bawdy musical, and it reminds me of Tommy, The Who, Cousin Kevin. We've got to talk about Cousin Kevin. It's sort of, yeah, it's a little bit. musical, not my favorite track. And apparently they do throw, it's atypical of ELP, whether it's a palate cleanser or just something to break up maybe the seriousness or just break up the album. They do throw these little musical type songs, but to me, it's my least favorite song on the album. But yeah, it kind of evoked some of the songs off Tommy, especially Cousin Kevin. All right, so now we get into a suite of songs, which is kind of a brings this album into a concept album, and it's very futuristic, a dystopian future, very bleak. And we're talking about, we'll start off with Khan Evil 9, First Impression Part 1. So it's a bleak world where humanity is either being destroyed or has fallen into decay. What do you think of this song?
Whew, okay, so we're on to side two. Let me preface this by saying this.
Not quite, my friend. It's
Oh,
side one.
oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's another
I didn't.
interesting part of this
Okay,
album. Yeah, because you got the CD.
I have
It
the CD. I
actually, it's
thought that it
still,
was
yeah,
like a Rush album where the entire side. Okay, so we are on to the concept of the album, I guess.
yep.
The suite, as you said, and this entire thing as a whole, I find very dense and very baffling and very difficult to isolate specific parts in my mind. But there's some good stuff going on here. There's some hookiness to the vocals. Um, there's some cool keyboardy stuff that's kind of anthemic. Um, and of course has that hook, welcome back to the show that never ends. Some really cool stuff going on lyrically. I like the whole concept of the humanity versus AI. How would they know that 51 years later that would be a really cool hip topic, right?
Mm,
I find this whole suite to be reading Moby Dick. I'm trying to comprehend what's going on. I feel like I'm missing things. I feel like, oh, there's something interesting that just happened, and then we're on to something completely different. Um, I thought I was a prog rock fan. I'm like, oh yeah, Rush,
mm.
2112, Cygnus X1, Dream Theater, Metropolis Part 2. Yeah, I'm cool. I know my prog. No, man. This is Dream Theater on steroids crossed with Bach and as we'll see some other influences that are going to come through in the next part. I felt like I was at school, Peter. I felt like I was at school. I felt that there was some cool stuff going on, some science fiction-y.
What's intimidating you, Mike, on this one? Out of sonically, what sort of, is it because there's a lack of guitars, or is there
No,
a
no,
particular element that's sort of challenging you?
no. It's the fact that I've listened to it 20 times and I can't remember how it goes. I can remember how bits of it go, but I can't remember how the
Yeah.
piece goes. It's like if you
Yeah.
if you
Is it because there's not a constant, like even with symphonies and classical, you've got a melody line or a riff that's repeated and comes back. And so do you think that there's too much virtuosity, there's too many melody things that are happening, but there's no sort of riff? Are you missing a central riff to this particular song? Is that what you're saying? That is the hook that would be an earworm in your head?
I don't need a riff necessarily, but maybe a little bit more simplified structure. Um,
Yeah,
Song-like
too much
structure.
virtuosity. So
Too much
virtuosity,
virtuosity. Like I get burned out.
virtuosity over overdrive. Yeah,
Yes, like I get burned out if I listen to a lot of fast guitar shredding in a single sitting. I
jazz.
would
Jazz is virtuosity, and you like
Okay,
jazz,
so
don't you?
so let's address that. The next piece is very jazzy. I
All right.
felt like I was listening to something,
Yeah.
completely in a completely different genre, and I like that. I like jazz. Here's the Oscar Peterson trio. I just
Mm,
got this.
mm,
I was listening to some Pat Metheny this summer, and even the Pat Metheny stuff was just a little bit too much for me. I
yeah.
like jazz, but I can only comprehend a certain level of jazz, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Above
that's
that,
that's the
like,
whole premise of this show. It's about
yeah,
putting out a compensation. I'll cover off this one, and then we'll get into the part two. So
yeah.
with part one, I like it. I like it a lot because keyboards. I love keyboards. It's at the center of the band, and I find the virtuosity to be sublime. I really, really love it, and more I listen to it, I sonically gravitate to Greg Lake's fretboard runs on the bass because he kind of anchors everything. He's like the glue between the keyboard and Carl Palmer's drumming. And the drumming is just ferocious, the patterns. There's so much counterpoint keyboard, as I said earlier, where you've got one hand doing a melody and a sort of another hand doing a counter melody. And there's a lot of kind of funky interludes. What did you think of that? Because sometimes it'd be going in one direction, and then there'd be a left or right turn, and it'd go suddenly funky.
Yeah, I
Like
noticed that as
towards the end,
well.
it gets really jazzy, and where he goes, roll out, see the show, and you've got these swooping keyboard lines. What did you think of that?
Uh, I liked that stuff. Individually, if I played those parts right now, I'd be like, yeah, this is great. This is great stuff.
Mm.
But I forgot they were there until you mentioned it.
All right, so we go to first impression part two. So welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. Roll up, roll up. Conceptually, this is about the decadence of the old world in this modern, this futuristic dystopian society. And all the decadence of the old world has been sort of preserved, like these exhibitions at a carnival, which is a really interesting idea. So, again, it comes back to this album cover, opening the gates, and you've got something that's really sort of bizarre, slightly frightening. So, what do you think of this particular piece?
Well, I love that the lyrical premise there, that science fiction-y premise. I'm pretty sure that
Mm,
there's some classic science fiction with similar themes. Even Star Trek, the cage. Um, I really, I think this is a really cool piece. I love the piano work on it. Love the drum work on it. There's just this one is also sort of the palate cleanser of the entire album. There's like two
mm,
palate cleansers. This is sort of the second one. So it's not as bombastic, but as far as that jazzy piano stuff goes that he's laying down there, it's incredible. There's some
mm,
really incredible playing here. Um, I love all kinds of music, like the Oscar Peterson stuff. You mentioned Bach earlier. I have some great Glenn Gould performances of Bach, and that's all piano stuff too. Again, I felt like I was at school with the smart kids, but I kind of also felt like, man, I'm into this. I'm into this. And it was again a left turn, but to me this wasn't quite as hard to take. I was like, at least I'll remember it after I'm done listening to it because it's so different from the rest of the album. Yeah, so part two, I definitely enjoyed.
yeah. It's got these nice little honky tonk piano pieces, and Keith Emerson, just wonderful playing. And the drum solo, it's just the phonetic pace, it's just breakneck. He's one of the great drummers. It's a drumming masterclass. So, um, yeah, I think for space, there's only a certain amount of space they could have had on the album. I think, on the CD, it may flow a lot better than on the album, where first impression part one, you've got to flip it over and flip it over very quickly so you get to number two, because I think that suite was always designed to be in a sequence and, one to the other in pretty rapid sort of space of time. go to the next part, which is Can't Evil 9 Second Impression.
Oh, you know what? I mixed all that up just because of the way the CD is sequenced. I didn't realize that there were two. Okay. I was talking about part two, the second impression.
Well, there you go. So you can recap it. Recap it.
Yeah, I love this jazzy piano stuff. This is fantastic.
Yeah.
No, yeah, see, you're right. This is different because on the CD it is a much more seamless experience here. So I was thinking in terms of three pieces, where in reality it's actually four because it's first impressions part one and two, and then a second impression. Um, yeah, the CD is the way to go for listening. I like that your album cover folds open like that, but I think that the CD is going to be the superior listening experience given this conversation here. So we're into the second impression now, and this is speed jazz piano dexterity that I just give me some more of that. They're obviously drinking a lot of caffeine. I'm going to tell you that on this album. I again, it's a left turn. I think it's a palate cleanser, and it just hit me the right way. Again, felt like I was in class with the smart kids, but that's what I felt about this second impression.
When you're referring to that, do you think it's like there's a mystery, there's something that you're not getting? Because
Um,
you've referenced that a few times. Do you think it's
yeah.
this music is a little bit more elite? It did sell quite a few albums, and it did sort of have mainstream appeal in regards to shifting lots of units with the rock crowd.
I just feel like I'd be appreciating it more if I had more musical knowledge.
Yeah. So, do you think there's a certain genre of music within prog where it's to appreciate it, you need to have that extra layer of music? Because that's what I'm trying to
Yeah.
uncover here.
Yeah.
It had mainstream appeal. It hit number two in the UK charts, sold squillions of albums in America. I mean, they were one of the headlines of the California Jam. 200,000 people grooving on this music. So it had mainstream appeal. So that's what I'm trying to counterbalance that. What were they gravitating to? There was something there for the rock crowd that they could appreciate that wasn't kind of elite. You know what I mean?
Well, did the banning of Jerusalem have something to do with a little bit more attention given to this album? Um, Still You Turn Me On is perfectly accessible, and I could see that being played on radio and becoming a hit, and
Mm,
a crowd pumping their fists to that track. But the kind of success that you're talking about is kind of beyond me. I don't understand how that translates, because to me this is like the epitome of what we would call smart guy rock back in my record store days. This is the
right.
epitome of it. This is like I said, I made a comparison to reading Moby Dick earlier, and I feel like, again, if I had more musical education, I'd be able to appreciate what these musicians are doing, and a lot if I was more well read, I'd appreciate these lyrics a lot more too.
Yeah. Well, this one was about the storyline was about computers that are scheming against humans, unsuspecting. So, which is a little bit of a show, a precursor to today and AI and a lot of things with the future. So that kind of follows it along. Um, piano, bass, drums, you've got the mini Moog, it drives things along. So then we go to an evil, the third impression, which is the finale, and you've got it's about the end of humanity. The machines beat man, man against the computer. It's a little bit more bleaker. Man's created the enemy, and the computers have become advanced and powerful and have taken over. What do you think of the finale to this album?
I think the finale is an album highlight. I love some of the anthemic keyboard stuff going on there. The ba 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 da ba
Mm.
ba da ba. There's some great kind of anthems going on there. You get kind of like I feel like I'm watching a semi maybe mid-budget science fiction movie from the early 70s. I love the dialogue between the humans and the robots. They found a very cool voice there to use for the AI. Um, yeah, very much enjoyed it. Thought it was pretty forward thinking. Uh, Film director by the name of James Cameron would make this AI versus humanity thing very popular a decade later. And in that regard, this is ahead of its time. And of course, H.R. Giger, that's also ahead of
Mm.
its time. Um, this is the point at which the album cover matches the music, I think. We're starting to get that feeling of the artificial intelligence and the biomechanical and all that other stuff. Uh, I thought it was a great ending. It was a great ending. Um, Reprised just enough music from the other parts to sort of tie things up at the end, and I was satisfied. Yeah.
Yeah, this is where it becomes fully andronalized, and everyone, the virtuosity's gone to that next level. You've got the pulsing bass lines. Palmer's got those interspersing march band drum fills. It gets There's a bit of jazzy interlude which I kind of enjoy, but it comes to a rousing climax. It's just energetic, and you know, for me, finishing in this, I wanted to go back to the start and hear it again and just pick up more because I do think it's one of those albums, which I agree, it's multi-layered, it's dense. Um, it does sort of reward on subsequent listens because it can be, I agree, very daunting to hear it for the first time. But just even the whole concept of this suite is very prophetic in respect of how computers, AI, well, not AI, I don't think, but computers taking over humans and looking to the future. So it's not a dated concept. It's a very relevant concept, and I think there's a lot of things within this album that you know, even though it's 1972, speak to 2024. So, well,
Yeah, 100% agreed. And as a sci-fi fan, that's a concept that'll never get old.
yeah. Well, I really appreciate that you've grappled with this album because it is a tough one, and maybe it's like getting on a mechanical horse and holding on to one part of the saddle where it's bucking you up and down and trying to stay on, so to speak. Um, so tell us your thoughts, your overall thoughts of this album, and would you listen to it again?
Yes, I would listen to it again. I'm invested in it. And music is a long-term thing. What we are talking about here is a 3-week exposure to this album. Um,
Crash course.
I'm glad that I own it. I'm glad that I have like a deluxe thing with some bonus value to it. It has some good liner notes. It'll help me digest the album going forward. I am going to continue to listen to it, but I still feel like listening to it is kind of like going to school for an hour. I don't know if I'm listening to it and getting pleasure out of that experience or if I'm doing it sort of more of as a mental and musical challenge to myself. Only the future will tell, but I am invested in it now, and no regrets. I'm glad that I've been exposed to ELP. I'd be curious about hearing more of the discography. Um, so yeah, I'm not in any big hurry to you know crack open Moby Dick and start reading it again, so to speak. But I will at one point or another play Brain Salad Surgery again and hear what it sounds like maybe 3 months down the road with fresh ears.
Do you think it would be more palatable to you if you, instead of hearing the album in one listening, dabble and just choose certain tracks, and then you might enjoy it more as a whole, if you know what I mean. So you've had a very intensive listening experience over the 3 weeks, listening it from start to finish. So especially like in the suite, hear one of the pieces and then come back to another piece later. That, sort of sample the album instead of listening into a whole. Do you think that might be a more enjoyable experience for you?
Yes, that might be a better way to listen to it with fresh ears somewhere
Mm,
down the road. Play a
yeah.
track, take a ear break, play another track.
Yep. Okay. Well, I think it's a wonderful piece of music. I like it. It's taken quite a while. I was like you, I found very challenged because it is very dense, but the more you hear it, it sort of reveals, it's sort of like an onion skin. You peel it off and there's more things that get revealed. And the virtuosity is just remarkable, especially, the keyboard work of Keith Emerson. Um, you know, he was sort of like a concert pianist, trapped in a rock band, maybe, perhaps. But that's not to say the other folk, like Lake and Palmer, they were right up there. So you had three truly great musicians. And a lot of critics cite this as their best album. So look, but I'm definitely going to explore more of their works and see how we go from there. Would you give it a score at this point in time, or
Hmm,
reserve your judgment?
I'm not comfortable scoring it yet. I feel pressured to lean towards the high side because of its reputation. So I'm going to decline to answer that question.
Abstain. All right.
Abstain.
No worries. All right. Well, thank you very much, Michael. As I said, we've got an ongoing series about out of our comfort zone, and it was a pleasure to see you squirm and beads of sweat under the prog interrogation. So, as I said, folks, we're new to this, and just take it for what it is. It's a new listening experience, and that's the fun of listening to music. It's all about new experiences. You can see Michael Ladano on Grab a Stack of Rock. Plenty of content, wonderful shows. There's always a weekly show. Check it out. I will put that on the link on this particular clip. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Tell us what you think of ELP Brain Salad Surgery, what your favorite album is. And one thing's for sure, you'll see Mike and myself grappling, wrestling, and arguing politely on all things rock in the future. See you later. Cheers.